Well, my name is Andrew Wong, and I'm the Director of Recruiting for Servant Partners. And for anyone who may be newer to Servant Partners, we are a movement of Christians who are centered on Jesus and planted alongside urban marginalized communities around the world. And our movement is made up of leaders both from the community, some of which you'll actually get to hear from tonight, and also leaders who have relocated into the community. But together, what unites us and connects us is our sense of calling from God to be about community transformation. The three main ways that we pursue community transformation are through church planting, where we plant churches that honor the unique heritage of every community, organizing neighbors to work together for systemic change, and coming alongside the leadership that already exists in every community to support and expand that. And we'll get to talk a lot about the leadership that God has already placed in our communities tonight. And we're really excited for this conversation with three ministers and community leaders who serve with Servant Partners. But you might be wondering, who is a local leader? What is a local leader? Maybe that's not a term that you're used to. Maybe you're even wondering if you might be a local leader. Well, we would say that a local leader is someone with deep roots, history, and relationship in their community, right? They're people that work for the good of their community with that relationship. Another way to say that is that a local leader is someone who shares in the cultural, racial, and economic experience of the neighborhood, and they serve others with that wisdom and understanding. And as a ministry focused on urban underserved or urban marginalized communities, we're thinking about leaders from those kinds of communities tonight. Some of you joining us may be leaders in your community, and you know that because you might have a role that's very official or a title, something like pastor or director, teacher or coach. You might serve with an organization or a ministry. You might volunteer with a school. But maybe you don't think of yourself in that way. You think of yourself as a neighbor, as somebody just from the community, as a parent, as a believer. We hope that whether you have a title or not, whether you get a paycheck and do what you do full time or not, that you would be encouraged tonight, that you would know that God has called you to serve your community as only you can, in a unique way, because you're from the community. And it's very clear that God values local leadership. We see this all throughout the scriptures, and I would say especially in the ministry and life of Jesus, right? He was a local leader after all, and Jesus was born into the community. Right? His family was from the community, and he knew all about the joys and struggles of being a Jew from Nazareth. He also understood his community's fears and anger. He understood what challenges they faced, and he could speak into that. He ministered in that context. And he also understood their joys, their hopes, their dreams, and how they understood God, and he ministered and spoke into that. Jesus announced God's kingdom so powerfully because he was from the community that he was reaching. And now Jesus did plenty of things that we cannot do. He overcame sin and death on the cross, amen. He rose again and defeated them. But he certainly did some things that we can do as a local neighbor, as a community member. And so tonight, I'm very excited to host this conversation with three leaders who have deep roots in their own communities, who know something about the joys and gifts and strength of their communities, and who have also felt the suffering and struggle of their communities. And so as they share, I pray God would stir your heart and remind you of your own story, your own community, and how you may be called to lead and serve there too. One more thing I'll mention is that tonight we have some giveaways that I'm really excited about. We're going to give away some books to help people think about discernment and serving in their communities. We're very lucky. A couple of our panelists have actually written some books that we're going to get to share with you all. The first one I wanted to mention here is called Voices Rising, Women of Color Finding and Restoring Hope in the City. And Annabel, Leyva, who's going to share tonight, she's one of the contributors for this book. I would commend it to you. It's a wonderful book of testimonies from women involved in community transformation around the world, women of color serving in their communities and in other communities. And that's a wonderful gift that we would like to share with you later tonight. We'll share more about that. The other book I would commend to you is called Practical Justice, Living Off-Center in a Self-Centered World. It's written by Kevin Blue, who's also sharing tonight. And it's a wonderful book for anyone who didn't get to be in Kevin's church or hasn't sat under Kevin's teaching. It's a great way to get exposed to some of his sermons. And we would also like to share that with you tonight. We'll share about that later. So with that, I'd like to actually introduce our conversation partners for tonight, Annabel, Kevin, and Omar. I'd love to just invite you all to get started by sharing a little bit about where is home for you. Tell us a little bit about your family and the ministry that you're doing. Annabel, would you get us started?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me be part of this panel. My name is Annabel Leyva, and I am originally from San Jose, California. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and so this is what I call home. More specifically, from the East Side, which is a Latino community in San Jose, and that's where I've been almost, I could say, all of my life. I'm married to Nathanael. My husband's from Sinaloa, Mexico, and he is an ordained minister in the denomination that we are from. And so together we've done ministry with youth and family, in music ministry as well. And we have two, I would say, beautiful children, my daughter Emily, who is 16, and my son Nathaniel, who is 14. So I am raising children who are now teenagers in the church and in ministry. And so we serve our community together.
Thank you, Annabel. Kevin, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, my name's Kevin Blue, and maybe I'll begin with who I belong to. Jennifer Chow Blue is my wife. So she's Chinese American, courtesy of her parents coming from Taiwan. We have 3 children, Joshua, who's 14, Samuel, who's 11, and Deborah, who's 7. So we're chasing Annabelle's kids. So she's given us advice on raising teenagers. Maybe just so you have some background, ethnically, I'm African American, right? Part of the Black community in the United States. And we've been here for as long as, we can find. Our story goes back. Maybe all of us or almost all of us immigrated from somewhere at some point, right? But some of us can't trace all of our roots. Maybe another way to understand who I am, I'm one generation removed from poverty. So my dad grew up in the Deep South in Birmingham, Alabama. He was the first to go to college and likes to say that he grew up poor but didn't know it because segregation and poverty were so common at that time. I'm 4 or 5 generations removed from slavery. And my family lines found real dignity and hard work and commitment to family and community, for some generations. I'm from Los Angeles, like Annabel. I've been in this city all my life. I've worked with servant partners in our church here in this neighborhood for about 25 years now. And has served as the lead pastor for our congregation for 10 years. We call ourselves a multicultural family of faith in the community for the community. And we have a foundational commitment to education of children in our neighborhood as a way to address generational poverty. My role has really been to help develop the faith community and to equip people for the work that we've been called to as a group. So that's lots of preaching, teaching, counseling, mentoring, prayer, those kinds of things to try to nurture that faith community. Much of it has been involved in leadership development as well, locally. So it's been some activism and advocacy, right? And some maybe trying to reform systems, but mostly it's been trying to create a supplementary system of the church community in the neighborhood to be able to address people's experience there. That's me.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Omar, tell us where you're coming from, brother.
Well, welcome everybody, and thanks, Andrew, and for the invitation. And I'm really glad to be here tonight. My name's Omar Cova, and I'm married to Gabriela Cova, and we are both from Mexico. I'm from Mexico City, and she's from Michoacan. And we just got when we got married, it was just kind of crazy how my mom from the city kind of talked to my suegra, my mother-in-law from the countryside, and we were just worried about that. So, but when we got married, it was just a beautiful union of families. And so we have 3 children. We have 3 children. 12. My boy's 12. Sael, and then Celeste is actually next month is going to be 10. And then we have a little baby boy who's going to be 2. So I got 3 kids at different stages of life here. But right now I'm pastoring right now in East LA. I'm actually interim pastor for my pastor took a sabbatical this year, so I'm in that role right now. And here in East LA, a church plant that's been growing for the past 5 years. And I never thought I would be in that position, but here I am with Jesus, just following him wherever he leads. But all my life, I've been here in LA. I lived 10 years down in Santa Ana in Orange County, and then my wife and I, my kids, we moved to India for a year and a half, and since 2015, we're here in LA. So I'm a Dodgers kid. I'm a Lakers kid. So yeah, I'm just LA all over. Puro Los Angeles, you know.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, Omar's a real Angelino. So, Omar, why don't you even start us off a little bit in this conversation, talking about calling. I'd love to hear you share some about how Jesus called you to Los Angeles, whether you want to think about it as like staying in LA or coming back to LA. You know, how did Jesus call you to that and to the ministry that you're doing? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, I never would have thought I would be um, kind of in a church pastoral role. I never saw myself in those terms. When Jesus rescued me at 19, I was just like, God, I just want to do. I just want to. This is what I told him. Don't make my life boring. Number one. And number 2, God, just show me, just keep on healing me. And so those were the 2 very things that I prayed. At that moment, I didn't know if God existed. I just kind of prayed it. And sure enough, God came and transformed my life instantly and in a dramatic way. And ever since then, I think I've just been, God definitely has not made my life boring. Definitely has not allowed me to kind of stay stagnant. Definitely in that manner. And so I would say I've had this journey of a nomadic life with Jesus. From an immigrant from Mexico down, kind of moving, crossing into borders, and now kind of moving around. But I think right now, just briefly, like there's 3 kind of like points as of recently that just want to like highlight. Kind of the first one is the call from Los Angeles over down to Orange County, and kind of like I never saw to go anywhere else but stay in LA and kind of you know do my graphic design and do kind of my life. But then I think all during that time I was also kind of like wrestling with my faith, that God will like you saved me, you opened my eyes to you, like what do I do now? And so in that moment I left Los Angeles and went down to Santa Ana in Orange County. And I think in that transition I think it was definitely a transition of faith. And I was at that time I was reading kind of stuff on with John Perkins and just the CCDA model, of moving into the neighborhood, and it kind of made sense to me. And so I was like, I don't want to just work there, but I want to live there. And so within the year, God opened up a door for me to live there. And I said, God, I did this commitment to myself. I didn't tell anybody, but I said, God, I'll stay here for 7 years and I'm not going to look right or left to anything else except what you have for me. And those 7 years turned to 10. The 7 years included a marriage, it included 2 kids, right? But also it included definitely a deep development of faith and just journeying with people, living with my community. I just kind of felt, um, just gifted with relationships in the community, and just loving to be among the people. And then, but then after that time, and here's the second kind of scene, is now at the end of those 10 years, I was like, God, like, I want to pursue my education, but I don't want to have it be boring and sit in the classroom. So he's like, all right. So he opened up a way for me to get my education, but at the same time do what Gabby and I love to do, is to live among people and walk alongside people, and along the way share Jesus. And so then that transition turned into a degree in the Masters of Arts in Transformational Urban Leadership through Azusa at 2013 and 2015. So that moved us out to India. And so along the way, God, again, it's like, God, I actually want to follow you wherever you're pointing, right? And then we were there, and then right before we came back, I started asking him, God, like, I don't want to go back and pursue a job and allow the job or that to be the destination, or that to be the north of my life. Give me a church. Give me a church community that has the same values as my wife and I, that have the same values that is deep in my heart, which is loving with people, walking with people, and sharing who you are. And so one thing led to another, and that's when I got introduced to Servant Partners. That's when I got introduced to Pastor Chris in Lincoln Heights, and then kind of the dots kind of connected, and it led me to Pastor Enrique here in East LA, and I say those three things because I think for me, this calling is first of all a calling to himself, calling to God, right? Kind of like with that encounter between Jesus and Peter. And at the very end, Jesus is like, hey, Peter, do you love me? Right? Like this, like, I feel like God is constantly calling me to him first, and then go feed my sheep, and then go and do this. So I think definitely the calling, at least for me right now, is staying here, being present in the community, being present with Jesus, um, um, and I kind of journeyed with Jesus long enough to know, at least for me, that keeping everything, holding on to what he has, but not clinching it to where I can't see him anymore, not clinching it to where I make it that my identity, right? And so, which can be easy, which I've fallen into at times, right? People needing resources, people needing this and that, right? And you having kind of the ways to do it, you kind of feel like you're saving, but I think God years ago has kind of broke that down and said, hold on to what I have for you, but don't clinch to it so much that you can't see me working in you. And so I think along the way, I think I've kind of learned that this calling that God has for me now is consistently coming back to him, but also consistently going and serving and being a neighbor to others. So I think that's how I would kind of see that calling now in my life.
Yeah, thanks so much, Omar. It's really powerful to hear just the movement in your life, from Mexico to Los Angeles to Santana to India, and now back to LA, and the different places God has brought you, and even sort of your decision to be back in LA when clearly you could be anywhere in the world. You could be doing a lot of different things. So what about for Kevin or Annabel? What aspects of calling, of God calling you to remain or return to your communities, get stirred up as you hear Omar?
Yeah, I think for me, I actually really wrestled with God about staying in my community, because my parents came from Mexico. My dad came from Michoacan, and my mom came from Zacatecas, and they met in San Jose. And they would always tell us that that they came wanting a better opportunity for their children, and so they wanted to make sure that their children had an education and had good jobs. And so for me, growing up in the neighborhood, I was very much aware of the poverty that we were surrounded in. And the reason was because my father was a landscaper, and I would sometimes accompany him. Like, he would sometimes take us when he would do weekend jobs. So we would go to nice neighborhoods and we would see those nice neighborhoods. So that we had opportunities to see in the Bay Area, those communities where there's huge houses and, beautiful gardens and huge, beautiful trees. And I wanted to live in one of those. Like, why couldn't I live in one of those? I mean, that was a dream to aspire to. And in my neighborhood, there was a lot of, graffiti, and there was gangs running the streets, fights across the street. There was police officers pointing guns at my neighbors' houses because they were doing a drug bust. I mean, that was common in my neighborhood, and I didn't want to live like that. And so for me, I feel like those were some battles that I was going through, just being raised in San Jose, in a Mexican neighborhood. And then as I was growing up, my father became a minister and then a pastor. And so for me, also being a kid in the church, in a ministerial home, and knowing some of the tensions that being in ministry, what that was like, and being from a neighborhood that was the way it was, I didn't want to be in ministry. There was this fight, but God, I have to say that God was calling me early on with feelings of, I want to start a nonprofit. I want to have a community center where we can offer services to the community. So my heart was still in wanting to serve, but just not in the church, and not through the kingdom of God. It was just, the outside. I wanted to leave and live in nice houses and then just come in and do my work and leave again. That's what I really wanted to do. But when the Lord called my husband into ministry, things started to shift inside of me. The Lord started to speak more audibly. And it's weird because I had always heard people talk about, I heard the Lord. And growing up, I'd be like, what does it sound like? And for me, it started to be where we were sitting in a Bible college class. And the first time I heard his voice, there was a teacher who was talking about going to seminary. And I was literally feeling like I was hearing, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was like an understanding, like, you have to go to seminary because I'm going to use you. And that was like, oh my gosh, it was chilling, just not fearful, but it was like, it just really spoke to my whole being. And my husband confirmed that he felt the same thing. So we finished our Bible college and went off to seminary, and we went to Fuller, where we got our master's degrees. And to me, I thought that the calling for me was going to be a professor. That's really, I wanted to go on and do a PhD and become a professor. And in the whole process, it was about equipping God's children, God's people, and those people specifically were my community. And I was clear. I knew that that's what God was calling me to. But when I finished seminary, I think I was kind of like, just still fighting what the Lord was telling me, because I still wanted to do more prestigious work and, sit behind a desk or behind I don't know. I thought highly of myself in those ways. But the Lord still was speaking and dealing with me. And when I finished seminary, I went back to working in mental health, which is the work that I was doing before. And in the Bay Area, San Jose and San Francisco Bay Area, it's really expensive to live here. So you have to work, and a good paying job, is important. So I went back to what I knew, which was mental health. They had offered me to come back to work, and they were going to pay me better than what I got paid before. So that temptation of just trusting that I'd have a good job was there. But see, the Lord had introduced me to somebody from Servant Partners while I was in seminary. And that person, it was one of our leaders here in San Jose. And so, they brought me in and just kind of introducing me to what ministry looks like in urban ministry in my own backyard. And I was in love with what they were doing, but I was still resisting. I was like Jonah, if you think about it. I was really much like Jonah, just really wanted to call the shots. But God insisted for me. And after about 3 years of fighting the Lord, there was this one instance where God was audible again, like that first time when I went to seminary. I was sitting in a meeting with some of the Servant Partner staff, and I heard one of my colleagues, beautiful friend of mine, Kayla, she was just sharing what her experience is like being in ministry with Servant Partners. And as she was speaking, I felt God's presence just telling me that he was calling me and that he was calling me to rest. And I couldn't say no. I couldn't say no anymore. And so I surrendered, and here I am. 2 years, a little over 2 years now.
Wow, thanks so much, Annabel. I think it's powerful too of even how your understanding of what did it mean to be in solidarity with your community and serve, even how that changed. You went from one vision of service, one vision of ministry to sort of a different one, and how God has been with you in that. Yeah. What about for you, Kevin, as you're hearing these things on calling, what stirs for you?
Yeah, I mean, those are really beautiful stories. I don't know. I guess I feel mine's a little different, but God works these things out, right, in all these different ways. So I sort of feel like there were some seminal moments and there were some inspirational figures, but and there was some hearing of God's voice. But I sort of feel like I kind of slid into this, like God kind of just drew me into the work. So some of that I think is how He just shaped me as a person, what I might call my sovereign foundations as a young man. Poverty always has mattered to our family, and it's always mattered to me. And there's some things that I think just from the way I grew up in LA. I mean, I grew up in the time when the drug epidemic hit, homelessness hit. When they deinstitutionalized people who were mentally ill too. Those folks hit the streets and couldn't have a place to live, couldn't hold a job. So all that kind of stuff happened and mushroomed in LA around the time that I was in high school. And so my brother was a part of that. So he got caught up in that. He's 11 years older than me. And so that always mattered to me. It was always very personal. Poverty was always a very personal issue for those reasons. But also I always knew my family story, and my parents worked very hard to get us and get me out of all that. And so we moved to a neighborhood. They were able to buy a house, and we moved to a neighborhood where those things weren't happening. It was in LA, but it was in a part of LA that stuff wasn't going on. So as I went through high school, that wasn't what I was experiencing at home and in our neighborhood, but it was what was happening right around our school and the places, with some of the friends that I had. So I didn't like any of that. But I knew that we had worked to get out of that. And so I didn't grow up with some of it, whereas other people grew up with a lot of it. And so when I got into college and then when I found the Lord, really, because even though I grew up in church, like some of us did, if you grew up in church but didn't know the Lord, say amen. So because He's gonna grab us and draw us into knowing Him, even if we just around it at first. So God grabbed me when I was 19 too. So Omar, I hear you, brother. That was a good year when I was 19. And that began a journey really of God giving me some opportunity to recognize how to work and what my heart was kind of made for, what I was made for in discipleship, in dealing with neighborhoods that had lots of needs, that were dominantly Black and Latin American, even though there were some Asian folks that were involved in that as well. So, and He gave me some clarity about that, but that was a really slow burn, man. It was not fast. So I had no intentions of doing anything in ministry. When I finished college, zero. I was happy to coach and work and those kind of things and be of help, but didn't have any intention of moving down into this neighborhood like the one I'm living in now that my parents had worked for their whole lives to get me out of. So I remained in LA and was committed in that sense, but I returned really to kind of an economic and educational environment that my family worked to get itself out of, right? And I think those were very gradual steps. And the story that I'm reminded of maybe from the Bible is, when the Israelites are crossing the Jordan, when they actually finally get into the promised land, and they have the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they set their feet in the Jordan River, and then the Jordan parts, right? So I sort of feel like God had me set my feet out there a couple of times, and then demonstrated His commitment and confirmed His sense of call in moving in a certain direction. And then He sort of shaped me as I went in that, and gave me the values and the heart and the capacity really to continue in that, to really walk with Him in that. So yeah, that's about the best I could tell you, because it really was a slow burn, but a beautiful one with lots of kind of small steps that have made up a large life call.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I mean, I hear the commonality in all of your stories of having some touch very personally with poverty, with your families, with these stories of migration. And so I wonder if we could just linger some in that of what has it meant for you? What have been some of the tensions of choosing to come back to a neighborhood? Omar, I've heard you reflect on, like, my mom wanted, moved us around to keep us out of certain situations, certain challenges, and then moving your own family back into it. Yeah, I wonder if people could reflect some on those tensions, maybe, on what that has meant. Omar, you want to start us in that?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's been like a slow burn, kind of what Kevin was saying, like, grown, my parents had a business in downtown LA in 7th and Spring for the longest time, back in like early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So I would just be in downtown all, and I saw everything on, like before it became all kind of cleaned down and stuff like that. You know, before there was any garment district and all that stuff, right? I mean, I would walk the streets and I would see the pain of the people, and I would see, like, God, like, I just want to get out of here. Like, my parents just going paycheck to paycheck. That the red bill back in the day was like, I would see that red bill very often throughout the year, right? Our light would be cut off, gas would be cut off, and having to do homework under candlelight. And I was just like, God, I'm just like, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm just gonna be rich, or like, kind of like Annabel was saying, like, you see other people's stuff, like, I want that, right? And so that was my track, man. That was my track. I studied art at Cal State LA, and then transferred over to Azusa, and I'm like, I'm loving Jesus, but then I'm like, but I just want to get the fastest degree and get out of here because I want to make some money. So I chose graphic design. So nothing to do with pastoral stuff, nothing to do, because my goal was to get a graphic design job and be in advertising and get some money. But along the way, I think, kind of what Kevin was saying, along the way, you see Jesus, and you have those moments like Annabelle, like, his presence is here and I can't deny that. And here I am trying to find a way to kind of live out kind of what my parent, like my mom and my dad, like, they're like, hey, we came to this country to give you good education, and kind of in a good way, trying to tell you, like, you got to be more than what we are, and yeah, that's true. But but along the way, at least for me, it was like, again, do you see me, Omar? Do you love me? And man, that came in it came in direct contrast and opposition to my own kind of like longing. And I think that tension has once in a while it comes up, here and there. But I think God shares his grace with me, and along the way he has provided for me. Along the way, every time I step out, kind of like what Kevin was saying, like, you take a little step into that Jordan River, and he just starts parting way, and you're like, I can't deny that, man. Like this is who God is, and if this is true of him in my life, then I want to keep on walking. And slowly that American dream or that lifestyle has eroded away, has eroded away. Um, and it's brought joy. I mean, at first, when I first told my mom, hey mom, I'm gonna go live in Santana, she's like, ¿para qué vas a ir allá? Why are you gonna go over there? There's poor people here. Like, what are you doing? And plus, why are you gonna do that? You studied all these years, for you to do that. Like, how much are they pay you? I'm like, it's a part-time. Part-time? Like, you're crazy. But then after the third time, she gave me her blessing. It was important for me to leave with her blessing. And yeah, so then along the way, it's been a journey of faith, and definitely there's tensions that come up. Definitely there's recommitments that need to be had with Jesus along the way. And but yeah, I think that tension of the financial tension sometimes kind of makes me nervous, but but I'm walking one step at a time with Jesus, and I see that Jordan River part, and I'm like, God, there's no other way. I can't see myself walking any other direction.
Amen. Yeah, Annabel, what about for you? Did you want to speak to any more of that sense of tension and navigating the return and the remaining in the neighborhood?
Yeah. So for me, in the tension, I mean, like I said, there was tension the whole way of just answering his call. But one of the biggest tensions for me was I wanted to provide security and safety and a better life for my kids as well. So kind of like repeating that story that my parents had, I was living into that as well. It was the same story repeated, except instead of being in Mexico, it's in the US, which isn't that's kind of ironic, but that's the reality. And so for me, it was like, I want my kids to have a better education than I did. And I want them to, get better jobs than I have had. And so for me, staying in the neighborhood meant that we were going to be in the worst schools of our county. And my kids were going to have to, I was going to have to choose to put them in, I didn't have the money to pay for a private school. So that was going to be the option. It was going to be our district. And I didn't want that. And I didn't want my kids to feel what I had felt growing up with, like Omar was saying, living check to check. And in our story, my mom used to go to the neighborhood churches to pick up food. And we always had a ton of bread that was moldy on our table. But that's, we were getting food to provide not just our family. We had a lot of people living in our household. So I grew up with those memories of just canned food becoming our dinner, and a lot of bread that was going stale, but that, is a part of our dinner. I didn't want my kids to experience that. So I had a lot of tension around that. But it's something that's interesting to me is that when the Lord called us to stay in the neighborhood, there was so many circumstances that always kept on bringing us back. Even after I got married, we would leave the neighborhood and then we'd end up back in the neighborhood. And at one point, I remember hearing my daughter say, "We're poor," and but like, what can I tell her? Like, yeah, we are, and we're poor even though we have an education. But that my daughter was owning into that, and I was afraid that was going to harm her. But my daughter actually started seeing that as something to advocate for and to speak up for. So in a lot of her group projects and when there would be class discussions, she would come home and she would tell me, "Mom, people were saying some very racist things, or people were saying some very derogatory things about poor people. They don't know. They've never lived the experience." So I stood up and I said, and then she would just talk. And I was like, "Thank you, Lord, because you've got her heart. You've got her. She is an advocate. She's a voice for the voiceless." And so that fear that I had, that tension that I had about what being in my neighborhood would mean for my children, the Lord showed me how he can just turn that, and how he can actually also speak through the young ones. And so, yeah, I think God has definitely done a 360 on us and just shown us that he's got this. And I don't have to worry about this because he's protecting my kids along the way as well. And, and I praise God for that.
Yeah. It's so beautiful, even for your daughter, like not a rejection of her story or rejection of where your family has come from, but even becoming like a change agent within that. That's so beautiful. And having met your daughter and knowing how brilliant she is and articulate, and I can totally see her as being like a budding activist. So that's beautiful to see. What about for you, Kevin, as you think about some of the tensions of choosing to come back to South LA?
Yeah, I mean, I think there probably are three that are dominant for me, even as I sort of have this sensing maybe as I hear Annabel and Omar share. So, but they're definitely money, education, and then ethnic belonging. And those have all been challenges to my sense of call to this kind of work. And really in, I think, some really basic ways. Some of those are echoed by other people's testimonies, but so in terms of money, I mean, the Black community has long been chasing economic security in this country. So that's not a new story. It's not only the Black community. So, but as that's maybe everybody has that feeling and really wants good for their kids and wants to live a stable economic life, right? So who doesn't want that? So, but as I think as a Black guy in the United States, I'm really aware of our story. That was something that was given to me, from my parents and I think, and the generation before them. So the challenge of choosing a more a path of downward mobility economically, I think, and to not, when I had friends that I went to school with who are millionaires right now and are living a really affluent life in the United States that are in the Black community. I mean, I grew up with some folks who were Chinese or Indian or various different nationalities and ethnic groups that are making great money, and driving fancy cars and those kinds of things. So, and just to recognize that their communities and their families feel to me like they're a lot more stable, even economically, in terms of their safety net than mine. So even though I have some of that, and then the history of it, there was a lot of tension about that. And then to go ask for money, I mean, after going to college and having some grad school, to go ask people for money, I mean, I couldn't send any letters to my family. I mean, I heard a lot from extended family about that whole issue. So fundraising, that just wasn't okay, and probably to this day, with a number of them is not okay. Though some of them have decided to support us, right, and have been won over the years. But then with education, again, it's like Annabelle's talking about, in terms of the kids. I mean, trying to navigate the Los Angeles school district and get a good education for my children is hazardous. I mean, for some people, life-threatening. That a lot of LA City Unified doesn't know. There's not an elementary school in my neighborhood who knows how to educate Black boys. Not one. So there are the kinds of things that are happening around here. You have maybe when people finish 5th grade, 10% of that class is proficient in math. 10% of kids in 5th grade, and we know where that stuff sends Black children. They sends them to prison. That's the pathway to prison, right? So my kids aren't going. They're not going. So, and this is a big tension in terms of my issues with this whole experience of, it wasn't when I was a single guy. It wasn't when I got married. It was when we had children and they became school age. And that is when we see a number of people move out of this community who can, and into places where they can, have school districts and things like that, where there's more safety and more support and a better educational environment. So and that's something that matters to me and to our family. And there's a lot of difficulty, I think, and struggle about that. And I would say there's still some tension in my life over that value, though God has said many times, like he spoke to Annabel, he spoke to me about my children many times about taking care of them, but I feel it in a visceral kind of way at times, at a gut level. And the last and the third one, really, I think, in terms of tensions over my call, is this issue of ethnic belonging. Because for the Black community in the United States, I think for a lot of people are excited about folks who want to be activists and work, and give back to the community and those kind of things, if it's Black. So I'm just going to say it like it is. So, but people did not appreciate me working in a multi-ethnic environment, or particularly having a lot of dominant concern for the Latin American community. So that wasn't cool. So, and I got a lot of questions about that, a lot of issues and a lot of accusations from people everywhere, from colleagues to people who are around my age and standing in life and my station in life and those kinds of things, to mentors, all different folks, had lots of commentary about that. So not in some circles, not in servant partner circles, not in CCDA circles maybe, but just in the Black community circles, the question is always, who do you belong to? Are you really down? Do you really belong? Do you really care about us? Do you really care about the progress of Black people in the United States? So if so, how come you are working with this other group of people along with some Black people too? So it wasn't just, those kinds of things weren't just fine, still aren't for some folks, I think. So there's some tension over that. And I feel that in a visceral way, because it matters to me. I mean, I love a lot of our community, right, has been African-American over the years. So, and it matters to me what I hear from them in a way that's a little bit different, partly because of that value and the way I was shaped as a Black man growing up. The voices of the Black community matter, right, in a unique way. So those are some tensions, I think, in those, and God's helped me, strengthened me, helped me to follow, I think, and to walk along, as has been needful in terms of being committed to a broader group of people. But, and I've decided at times I'm not going to talk on Black issues. Other people in our community are going to talk on Black issues because they need to talk on Black issues. And I'm going to talk about immigration right? And I'm gonna talk about other issues in the Latin American community, so, and some from the South Asian, maybe East Asian communities, because those are important issues and people need to hear me talk about those. So it's not just my own ethnic identity, but that's been a good challenge for me. It's been a good rigorous path of discipleship, I think, for me to be engaged in that way as God's called me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just appreciate in each of you sharing about tensions, how, there's kind of the past tense tensions that God has brought you through, but then even in the present, how God is still working things out, and how life in the neighborhood continues to be a place of sort of feeling tensions and trusting God and navigating through that. I wonder if, kind of pivoting a little bit towards healing. So just as you all have been talking about some of where God has brought you, Annabel, if you could maybe start off with this question of how has this journey of returning to your community and choosing to remain in your community in San Jose, how has that brought you closer to God? How has that brought you healing? Where have you encountered that in the midst of the tension?
So, well, like I expressed earlier, I experienced a lot of the trauma of just living in my neighborhood as a child and into adolescence and adulthood. It's been my whole life, really. So there's been a lot of trauma, and there's been a lot of learning to just survive. So I feel like God has been wanting to heal my life in so many different areas, but I really want to talk about three that I feel like has been the most, that stand out to me. And the first one is trusting him. I feel like, I grew up in the church. My father was a minister. I know the Bible stories. I know how to apply it to my life, but there was still that lack of trusting God. There was always this sense of, yes, I need to trust God, but I need to fix it. So I go to prayer, telling the Lord, I help me do your will and help me just follow you. But then I get up from prayer and I go off and do my own thing. I fix things. I'm a problem solver. And I have been for a very long time. And you kind of have to, when you live in a traumatic experience, you have to learn how to survive and you solve problems. So that's been an area in my life and my relationship with God that God has really been working on and touching on as I learned to walk with him, as I learned to listen to him, as I learned to stand still and wait, because I'm quick to jump. But God has really been working on just trust me, just wait, just slow down and let me act. And so that's been an area in my relationship with God where he's been working. Also opening my heart, like I expressed earlier, wanting to leave my neighborhood. There were harsh feelings against my neighborhood. Yes, I loved my people and I loved my neighborhood. I wanted to work, but I didn't want to be there because I wanted to have a different image of who I was. And I didn't want to be identified as who I really was. So to me, there was like that whole opening your heart to your neighborhood, opening your heart to really loving the way Jesus loves you. And so God has been taking me through that process of healing so that I can open my heart completely and not just halfway, but completely. And even if that means that, I'm getting my hands dirty as I'm digging holes and planting plants with my neighbors, or if it means that I'm, sweating and carrying boxes to load cars with food boxes, but doing it together alongside my neighbors. And doing it with my whole heart and loving them as in the process and not just doing it from far away. And then also just understanding God's calling for me. That's been another area that I feel God has been really healing me. And for me, I had been told from a very young age that I would be someday a minister's wife, which I am, that I would be a minister's wife. But there was never any validation of my own ministry, of my own call. So, I was in the music ministry. I was working with the children's department. I was working with the women as I, got married. But there was never a validation of you are called of God and you have a ministry and a calling for your life. And it's just your call. It really depends on certain roles and being somebody's wife. So, there did come a point where I didn't even consider ministry for me as a calling for me. When I was doing my undergraduate work, I chose to do sociology with the hope of becoming a mental health therapist at a master's level. So that's what I was really gearing towards doing, not ministry. And because I didn't feel like there was that call for me. But when God called me and when I finally said yes, God has really been working with me for me to understand that He has a calling for me, and I have a voice that needs to be used so that God can speak through my voice, and so that has been something that God has been healing in my heart, because I think part of my experience was to protect myself from feeling a rejection from stepping into ministry. And so that was part of my battle, part of that struggle, that tension, because I was told I didn't have that place for me. God didn't have that place for me. And so God's been healing my heart and showing me that from the moment that I was in my mother's womb, He already knew me, and He already knew who I would be, and He already knew what talents He would give me so that I can then use those and give them to my community, because He had a calling for me, and it's an important call. And so those are some of the things that God has really been in, impressing in my heart, and helping me and reminding me every step of the way, every day that I get up, every day that I'm in contact with community, when I'm praying for my neighbors, when I'm talking to them, God reminds me, I called you to do this. This is your ministry. And I know I have a long way to go, and there's still more He wants to do. There's more He wants to heal. Some of those traumas that I experienced early on in my life, God, sometimes I'm reading something that, that I'm reading for ministry, or I'm reading scripture, and all of a sudden God brings to my mind, oh, here's another area I want to heal. I'm like, okay, God, I don't know if I'm ready for it, but if you think so, let's do this. And so, God has just been amazing, really working in my life in so many different ways, and just touching those areas sometimes that I don't think I'm ready for, but He knows that it's time.
Wow, so beautiful. Thank you, Annabel. Yeah, that sense of, as you've been opening your heart to your community, how God has brought healing even to your own life. That's such a beautiful story. What about for Omar or for Kevin? What stirs for you as we talk about healing in the midst of the tensions, healing that's come through life in the community?
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, I never planned on any of this stuff. My plan was to get my education, get out, earn some money, and along the way just help people, right? But I think a lot of the process, and even till now, is I'm really healing in my inner being of a man, husband, like those deep roles of life. And I think, just healing through the trauma of growing up in a kind of an abusive home. And I recently did this, I think it's called the Enneagram, right? You kind of trace your lineage, and I'm like, dude, that was depressing. Like kind of tracing 3 generations back, the relationships and the brokenness. And I just came out of that like, I'm jacked up, man. I messed up. But then the leader that was leading us in that space, he kind of said, let's look at Jesus' lineage, right? And I'm like, okay, all right. Okay, so that's why it's in the Bible, all that, like, so and so is the son of so and so. People just kind of skim through that. They kind of don't. But I think for me at least, that healing part is that as Jesus was divinely, divine and God, He was also human, and we got to take a look and got to take a look at that. And I think looking in the past has been very scary for me along the way. I tend to look forward a lot. I tend to stay in the present. Let's look forward, but the back and meditating on the past, not so much. But as of recent, I want to say these past couple, maybe 7 or so years, has been a process, a slow cooker, a process of reflecting, of looking deep, of allowing Jesus into the dungeons of my heart, and kind of saying, he's kind of lighting up the path. He's like, open this door, please, because I need to get in there. And a lot of it has to be as a man, who I am, kind of my identity too, as far as what I bring to the table, um, and just owning my voice and kind of saying, okay, what I have to say is important. Throughout my life, my dad was always he was very abusive to me, and my voice wasn't really needed. Like, it was his dad's voice, and that's it, and mom's voice was shut down. And so, just along the way, I'm, I kind of grew up not really thinking that what I say is valid or important. I just kind of fly under the radar. But as of recently, these past couple of years, like, no, God's like, no, I made you, son, and you got extraordinary experiences that I've led you through. You've had these experiences, so you got to speak. And so yeah, I think in that way too, I think God has been healing me as I step into certain roles, as I coach people through them, or as I disciple people through, like, whatever He's doing in me. I'm kind of like also you know kind of discipling people through that healing too. Like, there is a healing that needs to be had, so God can kind of pour some more of His love inside. So I think for me, along the way, that's been kind of the healing process, more internally, be more reflective. I mean, that's not something that in my culture is like, at least in my household, wasn't even a word, like, reflection. Come on, you just do what you need to do to survive, thrive. What? Come on now, like, no. But I think along the way, the kingdom of God, and I think demands us, in a sense, to look at who Jesus is and then look at who we are. And sometimes that's scary. Like, I can't take it, Jesus, but He loves us. He loves us through it. He loves me through it. So yeah.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, just listening. I mean, I think I have probably some similar reflections. I guess I find that ministry really, it touches lots of pain in my life. So, and so it as I follow Jesus and as I've been involved in this work, it kind of leads me into places where the work itself, either through interactions with people or whatever, it touches different pain in my life. And so even though there's an outward journey that I have with service and whatever, preaching and teaching, those kinds of things, there's very much an inner journey that I hear Omar and Annabel talking about, of discipleship, where there's healing and wholeness that comes. And I think the ministry itself has drawn me closer to God and has made me feel my need of Him more. And so in that, I think, as I was thinking about this area of life, I think there are three experiences that maybe I'll just list. I won't describe them. I mean, you'll hear, there's lots that I could tell you. All of us have, everybody's story, right, is a big, great novel and drama and everything. I'll just list these for you. So, but I think that there's something in this for people who are listening, at least a couple of these, even like Omar, what you're saying about the stuff with your dad, and Annabel, what you're saying, about your place and role and not having that respected and looked at just on your own for yourself. I mean, I think that those things, I think there's something in that, I think, for folks who are listening. But the three that I'll just list, one was when my mother was assaulted when I was in middle school. So she was sexually assaulted when I was in middle school. Secondly, that my dad, though he was around, was really vacant and highly critical. So not physically abusive, but just vacant emotionally, just not present at all. He was just around. And then highly critical when he did have something to say. And then third was the violence that there was between my brother and my dad when I was really little. So those three things, the takeaways from those three really were that in my mom's situation, I was really helpless to protect or aid her, right? I couldn't do anything. But I think from hearing about it, I felt in some sense responsible for it. And I couldn't really explain that and couldn't unpack it until really the ministry really led me into a way it could open a door, like I think like Omar said, open a door for me to really understand what was happening there and for God to touch that and minister to me. Because when I was younger, we didn't unpack that. I just heard it and we just moved on as a family. There wasn't anything to do. I was angry for a few days, and then it was just there wasn't anything else, right? So, but those things, that kind of trauma, those difficulties, that suffering in life, it stays in us, and our bodies hold those, and our minds hold those, and it does affect us. And sooner or later, God will bring us an opportunity to heal, and this was a door for me. With my dad's vacancy and criticalness, the thing there that I took away was not being seen or valued or affirmed, similar, Annabel, to what you said, I think. And then from my dad and brother's fights, the conflict there was a fear of conflict. Because when I was little, I mean, there was nothing I could do about it. It's a big people that are fighting, in my house. So the ways that the outer experiences have touched on those things. So my wife at times has been very poorly treated. And I have to accept that she has to bear her own measure of suffering in her discipleship in the kingdom. But at times when she's been poorly treated, there's been little that I could do to protect her or aid her. And that was the thing that opened the door for dealing with that trauma about my mom's assault. So then there's been at times in my life and ministry, there's been criticism and gossip that has been entirely, it's not seen me really at all, right? In terms of who I am or the kind of person I am in the ministry that I'm doing. So, and that opens that door, right, to my dad being vacant and critical, right? And not really seeing me or affirming, valuing me. So, and then the third is at times when our church has had conflict, or there's been team conflict, or there's been like heated conflict with an individual, those kinds of things, those have been to dealing with that fear of conflict from my brother and my father's battles, right, in that apartment. So I think my gut tells me that there's struggle and there's challenge and there's suffering, but in the midst of that, there's green pastures, right, and there's still waters, right, and there's the blessing and beauty, of goodness and mercy chasing me down, right, because God's after my healing in the midst of having me be after His kingdom. So it really has been, I think, a really rich, though rigorous, discipleship that has been required. I think I like the words that Omar and Annabel are using. It's sort of been required. If I'm going to continue to move forward in this, I have to have that kind of intimacy with Jesus grow. And my inner journey has to grow right along with whatever outer work God's calling me to do.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing about those stories of healing. I know those are very precious and deep things, and thank you for entrusting us with those. I think just right now we're going to pivot into kind of the question and answer time. So I just want to invite anyone who's been listening along, if there's something that's really stirring you, you want to hear more about something, a question has been brought up for you as you've heard Annabel and Omar and Kevin share, feel free to just ask that question in the question and answer feature. You just click the button at the bottom of your Zoom and you can enter your question there. And just as we're waiting for some of those to come in, some of this has been alluded to, I think, by each of you, but I'd love to hear some reflections you might have on how your experience is being from the community, and even some of, like Kevin, you mentioned sovereign foundation, some of what God has put in your life. How have those things shaped the kind of minister and leader that you are? In other words, how is it that, Kevin, you're able to minister as only Kevin can, as somebody from South LA? Annabel, how is it someone you can minister only as Annabel can from Mayfair? I'd love to hear some thoughts on that, if you had any reflections on that, just as we're waiting for any other questions to come in.
Maybe I can offer a couple of things. I think, as I look back, it's easier to see in retrospect than it is to see in the moment, I think, for me. And it's easier to see, kind of how God's put things together moving forward. And so so I think that the key for me has been to look back and see how God's shaped me. So like, I grew up in a school that had a little bit of a lot of different kind of people. And in the midst of that, I think the takeaway from that is I can work with lots of different cultural groups and can be comfortable in mixed environments, just like I could be comfortable in all Black environments. And so that I think is a unique piece culturally of how God's made me that helps me lead a multicultural church and be involved with a ministry like Servant Partners that's interested in reaching a variety of ethnic groups and doing that with teams that are ethnically mixed. So I think that's part of who I am in becoming, having the skills to do that are sort of just in me. They aren't so much learned or studied as much as they are in me. And then there's been some learning and study that's augmented those. But there's some things like that. Even some of the conflict that was in our household as I was growing up, I think helped me learn skills of being diplomatic. And so though I can be very direct, I can also be diplomatic, right? And that's kind of my more place where I'm most familiar or comfortable, kind of my go-to, is I really want to work with folks and hear them and talk to them and kind of figure things out. So I'm not like drawn to conflict. So that also I think is very much, in trying to minister among groups that have lots of tensions. I mean, we're messy as people in general, but then when you put us together with different cultural groups and all that different, it gets to be a mess. So, but having a draw toward diplomacy and really trying and peacemaking and those kinds of things, I think has aided me, right? In terms of, it shaped me in terms of the kind of ministry God's called me into.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, for Omar or Annabel, reflections on that?
Yeah, for me, I feel like, I grew up in the neighborhood, in the Mayfair neighborhood, which is, my parents bought the house there when I was 5. So that's been a place where I went to school, went to after school programs. And even when I started my career, when I started working in nonprofits, and I started engaging with a lot of the nonprofits that were serving the neighborhood. I've gotten to know a lot of the church leadership. There's a lot of churches in the neighborhood, so I've gotten to know a lot of those church leaders, the store owners. I'm very much a child of the neighborhood. I know my neighbors. It is an immigrant community, so it's interesting because most of the time when people see me, they don't even know that I speak English. They don't even know that I was born in the U.S. Most people think that I immigrated as well. And so I think that because of who I am, because of how my parents raised me, they raised me to be Mexican in America, even though I was born in America. So I'm very much a Mexican, and very rooted in those cultural, in my culture, and but I'm also very rooted in the American culture. So I think that that's one of the things that I bring with me into ministry, is that I bring my knowledge of the community. I bring the knowledge of the experience of the people. I bring with me just the knowledge of the community. I know who some of the key players are. And I'm able to do that not only for the immigrant community, but also for the leadership of the community. I'm able to navigate both worlds. I'm able to speak the language. I'm able to, to engage with the two different cultures and do that, I would say, fairly well. And I think that that's a blessing. It's a blessing for my community, because then I'm able to bridge the gaps that sometimes exist in our community. So God has been able to use who I am in the ministry that He's placed me in.
Yeah, thank you so much for those thoughts. Well, a couple of questions have come in, so I figured we could jump into those. But Omar, as you want to reflect too on like how your own experience connects to your work, that would be great too. So this first question comes in, and they're asking, what advice would you give someone who wants to serve but lives outside the neighborhood? So I wonder maybe if that's some of your own reflection on kind of working for justice in the community as people from the community within it. There's those outside of the community that also have a concern, that also want to be involved. What counsel would you give someone in that situation?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, really checking
Las cosas que tenemos.
check your heart and your motives first with Jesus, and if this is something that God's kind of leading you in, and then go in as a learner, go in as a listener, listen to the people. Don't go in trying to have a plan and kind of do stuff, right? I think, besides the little interaction that Jesus had with the religious leaders at a very young age, we don't really hear him speak until he's 30, right? And so he lived it, right? He moved, right? He lived and he listened and he saw and he really felt. And so I think uh, for me, when I see that, and even for others too, is let's allow that first part of listening and being with people be a part of that initial step into um, either moving into a new area. um, I mean, I think
Que
I would just kind of start off
creo que
there,
eso
right?
sería.
Definitely, don't journey alone, journey with others too as well. um, I know when I went to India, we definitely had to ask God, give us just patience to just listen and not have a plan. We're not going in to do to we don't have really a plan. So and God just provided friends. I didn't know the language again. Migrant journey with Jesus 2.0. And but along the way, I was just able for the first few months, just eat with people, just kind of do what Jesus did. Eat with people, talk with people, listen to people, right? Don't go in there having a plan set. I would just journey with people be at the center of that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Just that emphasis on first listening and that posture of having a relationship before providing any kind of service or solution. And yeah, just the key that is. It's great. Yeah, Kevin or Annabel, did you want to add anything to that? Don't have to.
Yeah, I might just say, Redeemer, we have a number of partnerships that are outside the neighborhood, but there are two things that are true. I think for our local community in terms of working with people. And one is that I think those people who are partners, they're interested in integrity, but not control. And so I think those folks that are working and contributing from outside the neighborhood are not interested in controlling the decision-making and the dynamics that are happening for the local community. So they're able to trust that those who are local can pray and can decide and can use money in a way that's best in that way, and they don't have to be involved in that way, whether they're contributing how should I say time, talent, or treasure, right? Any of those three. So it certainly is possible, I think, for partnership to happen that way, but it's got to respect what's happening locally in a really in a clear way. And so I think whoever, there are a lot of people who are like that. And a lot of those folks that are outside do have some more, how do I say, they have some expendable income they want to invest, or they have some greater educational talents that they want to offer, or some expertise, in some way that they want to offer in that way. So sometimes those people have political roles that can be of use and help as we're trying to get something done, locally. So, but they understand, I think, and are able to have those roles and not demand to be in control of what's happening locally or the relationships or processes here.
Yeah, I would agree with both Kevin and Omar. One of the things that I failed to say earlier is that part of my ministry is to I'm the program director for San Jose Bridge Communities, which is a nonprofit that we launched right off of our site in San Jose. And one of the things that we value most is change through the context of friendship. And so just as Omar and Kevin were saying, we do have people that are outside of our neighborhood in more affluent areas of San Jose or surrounding towns or cities who are very much interested in or passionate about serving from where they are. And so just like Kevin was sharing now, a lot of the partners that we have, they do share their talents, and they sponsor some of our programs and donate. They might donate clothing, or they might donate food, or different things that we need to make our ministry successful, or to be able to reach the families in the ways that they need. So they just make themselves available with what they're able to offer, like Kevin said, with their talents or with their time or with their treasure.
Oh, that's great. This next question.
Pitch one?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Maybe I can just pitch one more thing, Andrew, in that maybe by way of example, our educational program would not be where it is without the partnership of other people outside who could help pay for facilities and staff and those kind of things. As just a strictly local ministry, we can't really fund all that. So those contributions, I think, they are substantial, and they do make a big difference in the lives of the kids that are in our neighborhood and the adults' capacity to help parents educate their children. So, but secondly, even in terms of, we have a neighborhood drilling thing. We're trying to, eliminate the neighborhood drilling, the oil companies that are drilling in the neighborhood and are illegally producing all kinds of toxins and are, it's really to the detriment of everybody who's local. So, but trying to, that's David taking on Goliath, right? I mean, you have a multinational, multi-billion-dollar oil company, two of them that are working here. The only reason that we were able to win that battle with one of them is because God brought together a set of partnerships, right? Some of them political, some of them economic, some of them legal, right? Some of them with specialties, that had specific kind of training, even in terms of chemicals, science, right? That kind of background, botanists and stuff to analyze plant material in the neighborhood. All those kind of things came together. Now, almost none of those people live here, but God gave them a concern for this place in a partnership with us. And in truth, at least in Los Angeles, and maybe this is true, in terms of fragmentation of the United States and many, maybe multinationally, but certainly in LA, there could be far more partnership across neighborhoods and far more partnership across agencies and that kind of thing for the well-being of everybody, instead of more of a, well, this is my backyard, that's yours, stay out of my area, I'm not concerned with what's going on over at your spot. So LA's kind of built, its geography and its political history is built on that kind of segregation by neighborhood and economics and race. So, and we could stand to have a lot less of that. So that kind of partnership is actually good. And I think a sign of the kingdom moving when there's people who can work together.
Yeah, the power of partnership between the community itself, the grassroots, as well as people that have something else to offer beyond it even. Yeah. Well, this next question they ask, are there ways that having a ministry role and title in the community provides good opportunities to participate in transformation? Are there ways ministry roles and titles create barriers or awkwardness in your position in the community?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question. Took me a while to kind of process that, but I think initially, I would think, don't go into the neighborhood saying, hey, I'm the sexist title to the neighbors. They just want to make sure, like, if you've done your job being neighborly, if you've done your job loving people, you don't need the title for them, right? But at the same time, I think that title can, like if you're in some meetings with some city folk or maybe some partnerships. I mean, they like to each kind of know like the people group you're talking to, the certain people group, so certain group of like partners. They want to know who you are, right? And so sometimes that title plus that phone number plus it adds to like just kind of who you are, right? But I wouldn't, I would just make sure if I'm going to the neighborhood, like I'm just going as myself. Like I'm not, going in with my card in a sense, but that's just me though. I'm just kind of I don't want anything to come in the way of me interacting with the community. And if a title or even titles as pastor or anything like that, or maybe they might just call me brother. Yeah, I'm your brother, whatever, But maybe over here, if I'm talking to somebody that's in charge, of let's say the Boys and Girls Club where we used to rent from, like, then I would kind of use my title in that sense. So I don't know, just initially, I think I would just say, just be aware of kind of those kind of dynamics that you might kind of present yourself in, because some people in the neighborhood might be shut off, or they might come at you like, oh, so you belong to, so they might think that you're organizing for somebody else they met that you aren't even affiliated with, but the last person they came in contact with that shined a title upon them, and asked for their information and never got back to them, I mean, it's just, it might create another barrier, so just be wise in that.
Yeah, Annabelle, go for it.
Yeah, I think for me, because of my role in the nonprofit that we launched, everybody knows that I'm the program director, but I'm also la vecina and I'm also la hermanita. So, so depending on who I'm talking to, I'm somebody's little sister or I'm somebody's neighbor. But so yeah, so titles, I don't carry like the missionary title or the pastor or minister's title. People don't know me by that. People just know me by, the lady who directs the program, or the lady who is my neighbor, or the lady who's my sister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to pitch. This is a good story. So there's a brother in our church now who lived near this neighborhood garden, and when the garden got started up, my wife and I got a plot there and we started gardening. So just to meet people. And so we met this guy there, and he's from Guatemala, a really good gardener, loves plants, loves living things. So I was talking to him and invited him to church a number of times. So he knew I was a Christian, and we got into faith conversations with him. But for maybe a year, he didn't want to come. Eventually, he came to a gathering, and that it was hosted at somebody's house. It was a Thanksgiving dinner, and really was warmly embraced and loved that. And then decided to come to church a couple weeks later, and then found out I was the lead pastor, and I think he almost fell over. So it was shocking to him, but he loved it. He loved it. And there's something to be said about that in terms of evangelism and kind of outreach in that way, and among neighbors, I think that is beautiful, right? So I have met with some of the African American community here, and that are church African American families. It does matter to them. Sometimes I'll use the title pastor if I'm talking to them about something where I think that I sort of sense God's leading in that, and sort of feels like that could be important somehow. So it is rather rare, but I will use that, sometimes, right, when I'm talking to people, if it seems helpful. But, yeah.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, I think there's sometimes too, there's some like people that in my community that have come through rehab homes that have had a pastor. So there's certain wisdom in kind of like, yeah, I'm the pastor. Oh yeah, pastor, yeah. And so they kind of get more happy, like to even as they kind of say, oh, see, okay, pastor, yeah, come on, yeah, he's the pastor, you gotta meet so and so. So rarely do I kind of use that, but if I know that they're coming from a certain kind of background, and then I kind of put that out there, and so anyways, just some wisdom in that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this next question, this one is towards Annabel. So they were reflecting on how, Annabel, you were sharing about discerning your calling and how it felt like it was kind of growing and changing. And so their question was, how can you prepare for God's calling when you don't have a clear understanding of what that calling is? Like if it's still shifting and growing. Maybe we could start with that one. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, I feel like even without me knowing, the steps that I was taking for preparing myself for education was something that God was going to use for his calling now. So, so I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes we think that we know what we're doing, and it may not be anything having to do with ministry, but somehow or other, God has already preordained that, and it's already going to be part of the bigger picture that we just don't see, because we might just be seeing a small portion of that picture. But later on in time, that picture is going to grow bigger, and we're going to be able to step from farther away and see how it all folds in together. So my undergraduate work is in sociology, emphasis in family, with a minor in religion. Why did I do that? Because I had an idea of becoming a therapist, and I wanted to be a therapist in the church. That's what I wanted to do early on. Not a minister, but a therapist, because in my church there was a lot of trauma and we needed help. But that's not the direction God took me in. And I did work in mental health. I was a mental health rehabilitation specialist for 10 years. And before my work here with Servant Partners, I worked as an academic advisor for Fuller for a few years. And so, I thought, I have all the skills to do that kind of work. And I thought that's where I was going to be. But as time progressed, God made it clearer and clearer that this is where he wanted me to be, and this is what he wanted me to do. So all of that knowledge that I gained in my undergraduate work is helping me now to work with families in my neighborhood. My experience working in mental health, and particularly working with early childhood education and parent education, is something that God is using now as I'm providing parenting classes to mothers in the community. So I didn't know that those were going to be things that I would be using now, but the Lord knew, and the Lord allowed me to go through all that training so that he could then use it, so that I could use it now for his kingdom.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, just looking back and even seeing how God used it in ways that you couldn't have expected. So this next question, they ask, how do you stay involved with the community once you have children and it feels like your capacity to serve and connect with people changes drastically because of the needs of your own family? I know there's somebody here who's got a word on that. So
here, tell me the secret. Tell me the secret and we'll do it. So if you could bottle it, we could fundraise. So that's a great question. Wow, what a great question. So yeah, I think it totally has changed, I think for me and Jennifer. And I think I wouldn't say for the better or worse, but it is different. So one thing that opened up for us was as we had children, because, again, I married when I was 38 and had my first child when I was 41. So I got started later than like almost everybody else in this neighborhood. When I walk my daughter to school, I'm the grandparent, everybody thinks, right? So maybe the great grandparent in some situations, but I gotta tell you, there are relationships that we have that are now so broad because we've had children, and then people want to see your kids, or they want to relate with your kids, or your kids go to school when you end up with institutional involvement with other families, right? It's just, there's some beautiful opportunities there for outreach that just frankly weren't there before. So it is different, and it is more complicated in certain ways, and it does slow us down some, but it's just different. It's not, I wouldn't say it's better or worse, but it's unique. And I think it's been a blessing. I think I've loved it. So I enjoyed ministry as a single guy and as a married guy, but I think as a father, it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful, great opportunities.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I think it's just different. And I think accepting that difference, accepting that transition is tough, especially if before you had children, you were kind of like Annabel, kind of like, right? Like, I think, or at least having a lead role in some aspect. And so I don't want to touch kind of what Kevin kind of shared. I want to touch on the part that, train up leaders, because you're stepping into a new phase of life. You're stepping into a new phase of leadership within your family. Now your family is growing, your kids are growing up. Develop leaders, right? So don't wait too long. I think it'll benefit you, it'll benefit your team, it'll benefit the ministry, it'll benefit others, because if people are still kind of going to you for everything, even with kids, it can get toxic. And I'm guilty of that early on when I had my first kid, because I was so entrenched in people's relationship, like I was a part of people's lives, of dozens of people's lives, and kind of that insecurity growing up of being loved or feeling like approved, and also kind of what Kevin was talking about earlier, right? You're in ministry, like it brings up just all that stuff. And so my wife had to be like, what are you doing? You're working more than 40 hours a week. There were times I was busting out maybe 65 hours. And she's like, what are you doing? You got to come home. And so kind of those kind of I'm just glad that my wife is like, she takes, she's from the hood, man. She'll she'll kick my butt. But in a good way of like, what are you doing? Right. And so I really had to release that and say, wow, like I'm being, again, holding things tight enough, not seeing Jesus, what Jesus wants to do in me. So a part of that is developing leaders. And so I was like, all right, they might not handle things as maybe how I would, but it's okay. I'm going to develop them and kind of empowering them. So I kind of, on that flip side, it'll be good for you. It'll be good for your ministry if you see leaders kind of take charge now, so that you can step away and be with family and being okay with trusting them.
I think for me as a mom, when God called me into seminary, I think that was the first, it was a hard experience, just knowing that I was, after work, I was going to also go to school. And I didn't want to be away from my kids. I didn't want to feel like I was failing my children by not being present, like Omar was just saying right now. So what I would do, and I don't not necessarily recommend this, but this is what I did. And it was, I would take them with me to seminary. They were the kids that were in the hallway eating their snacks, peeking inside. What is mom doing? Everybody knew my kids. I think I was the only Latina in the classes, and I was the only one with kids there. But I just kind of dragged my kids in, and they were like a kindergartner and second grader. They were little. So my kids kind of got used to being around adults and being around people talking about Jesus and talking about ministry. They got used to that because I dragged them with me. Of course, not to everyone, not to every single class, because there was times that it wasn't, I just couldn't. But for quite a bit of it. And then I worked in seminary, so the kids were with me sometimes too, sleeping under my desk while I was, working there, doing whatever I was doing. So my kids were very much involved in just the development of what I would be later on in ministry. And then now my kids are teenagers. And so one of the things that I think I really appreciate, that I'm able to see the talents that my kids have. Like my daughter, she is wonderful at working with children, and she's in a program where she's learning to do a lot of digital work. She's learning to work with cameras. She's learning to videotape and edit, and all of those things that she's learning in school. I'm able to now say, hey, Mija, I have this project. Would you be interested in taking it on? And, oftentimes she does. And so she's now involved in my ministry through just volunteering with some of the skill sets that she brings. And my son, he's a little more reserved. So I also have to understand that if he's not ready to step into that, give him his space. And maybe later down the line, later on in time, when he's ready for it, if the Lord calls him to also be involved, then, just recognizing the talents that he brings and then inviting him to join in.
That's great. That's great. I appreciate just all those different aspects of what it can mean to do ministry as a family, how to live within limits, how to bring the kids along, but also to develop leaders, and sort of for it not to be just reliant on us. Well, the last question that we have in, I think it touches on some of the healing aspects each of you shared about. And they ask, how do you overcome pain and love those who have hurt you when you are in the healing process?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. How do you overcome pain and love those who have hurt you when you are in the healing process?
Maybe I can start, at least, to touch on some of those things. I mean, complicated question. I think I might disassemble the question a little bit, because I don't think that, in my experience, I would probably say in discipleship, I don't know that pain is something entirely to be overcome. So I think part of discipleship is learning how to live with pain. Not that there's not healing, right? And that God doesn't minister to places where we have where we have wounds, right? Trauma from the past. So, I mean, he certainly has done that with me and with many people in our community. But I think, at least in a certain part of the American church, there's a desire to kind of get beyond hurting or get beyond pain and that kind of thing, and not live with difficulty and suffering and trouble. And I guess, frankly, as I read the Bible and as in my life experience, I'd probably say that doesn't look like discipleship to me. So I'm not looking really to in that sense overcome pain, in terms of be rid of it in my life, but rather to have what trauma Jesus wants to transform, right? So and as he does that on the cross, right, he takes our pain, and we killed him, right? So he takes all of our pain, our anger, our grief, those things, and in him those things can be transformed. So I think only the Holy Spirit does that. I don't know if there's a recipe, exactly, that I could give you. There's some ways that we can invite God into that, but I don't think that it's entirely be rid of, right? But he does give me capacity for healing and wholeness, and the capacity also to love in the midst of that. And at times he does call me to have some boundaries. I might say, maybe use that word, that I think are for my own health and healing, because it's not just about the ministry that's out there. It's also about what he's doing in me and his ministry to me.
That's good. Annabel or Omar, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very kind of complex question, very different layers to that. But I think I would say, if don't just step into ministry because you know the function of it. If your heart is hurt and there is things that you still need to work through, maybe certain space from that for a season or for a period of time might be wise, because we lead out of, sometimes if you're in the game for a bit, you can ignore yourself for the sake of serving. And that's, in the long run, if there's deep pain in that, if there's still unforgiveness in your heart, if there's still unresolved things, layers down, it could put, you'll lead off of that. You lead off certain insecurities, or conflict resolution is not going to look good. So if for a season that might be you stepping off and seeking certain healing, I think that would be wise. Now, I would say that, like Kevin, there's certain pain that instructs me to go to Jesus with, to go to the cross. Here's my pain. So it's not like, if I have pain, I have not resolved. No, like, in fact, there might be some other stuff deep down inside. And so I would say that there's certain moments in my life. My dad just, not just abused me or my brother, but hit my mom. Like, it was violent. It was, to the point that I wanted to kill him. Right. And I cut him down from the rope. He tried to commit suicide twice, and I cut him down, not because I was good, but because my rage was so a part of me that he was gonna go out by my hand. And that's when Jesus came. So I've had to had degrees of healing through that. Now, I realized that when I was doing ministry, when I would remember those events and they didn't have control over me, that's when I knew there was a degree of healing where I could then lead people, or allow a new way of speaking about trauma towards others that have been under trauma, and express the hope that there is in Jesus, express the hope so that's when I knew, like, there's a level of healing that happens that allows you to be free. But along the way, there's still some little things that I have to continue to give to Jesus. So so there is a level, a degree of I have the scars in my hands that reminds me of things that have happened, but I'm not chained up to those memories anymore. They don't impact the way I lead my life now. I do still remember, but now it's through a lens of Jesus, because it's been a journey of healing. But along the way, I have to get that little tune up once in a while, more often than not. Being loved by Jesus. So I don't know if I would just tag that on.
Annabel, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that they said it really well. Yeah, I agree with what they're saying.
Yeah. Thank you for that wisdom. It's great. Well, maybe as we just come to a close now, and out of all the things you could share, if you would, there's somebody listening at home, or someone's going to be watching this recording 6 months from now, what word of exhortation or blessing would you like to offer that local leader who's maybe serving in their community already? Or maybe they've never thought of themselves as a local leader. They're like, I'm just living here. I'm just trying to do my best. Or maybe they feel like God might be leading them into a fuller kind of leadership. Maybe there's a role to take, or there's taking it on in a more formal way. What would you say to someone in that position? What word of exhortation or blessing would you offer them? Annabel, would you start us with that?
Yes, I would say not just for the women, but in particular from a woman to a woman. I just want to remind you from Deborah chapter 4, verse 9 to 10. Deborah answered, I'll definitely go with you, talking to Barak. However, the path you're taking won't bring honor to you, because the Lord will hand over Sisera to a woman. And then Deborah gets up and she goes with Barak to Kadesh, and he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men marched out behind him, and Deborah marched out with him too. And so what I want to highlight about that is that God spoke to Deborah all the time. She was in conversation with God. She heard him, and she was the mouthpiece for God. And God gave a word through her to Barak. And he, with his own insecurities, he didn't want to go without her. So she went. And God did, his miraculous work and brought victory. And so what I want to encourage to women in particular, but not just women, but in particular to women here today, that if you're questioning your call and the sense of God's calling in your life, if you're not sure if he truly is calling you, I just want you to encourage you to know that he does speak to women still today. And he is inviting you to become part of the victory that he will bring to his kingdom. So I just want to encourage you to step into that space with him.
Amen. Amen. Kevin, what exhortation, what word would you offer?
Well, I've been kind of in the Exodus these days and thinking about this. So I gave you all that passage about, the Jordan when they're coming over, but there's two passages that I think this word comes from. One is from Numbers 13 and 14. That's the first failed attempt when they come up to the promised land, to the Jordan. They send the spies. Spies come back and report, and Caleb and Joshua are like, "Let's roll, man. We got these folks. This is the place that God's given us. Let's go." And everybody else says, "No, we ain't going." So the next time they come up, when Joshua takes them across, right, they choose to step into the promises of God. So, and it's that second generation that comes along that saw the failure of their parents, really, that older generation, and then decided they were going to step in and actually believe God this time when it was their turn. So I think the folks, that are in this kind of decision-making process of whether or not you're going to follow God or not into the promises that he has for you, what I would say is choose faith, right? So be like Joshua. So when I was first responding more to this kind of call into the neighborhood, God actually gave me a new name, and it was Joshua. It is the name of also my first son. So because he wanted me to remember to be strong and courageous and to be a person of faith in the midst of dealing with all the challenges and the conflicts and the difficulties and the struggles. So, but to remember that he was going to be the one who would cause me and God's people to inherit the promises that he had made to them. So I would say to you, be like that, right? So be the folks who choose faith to inherit the promises that God has promised his people. He's offered to us in serving in these kind of underserved communities and ethnic minority communities here in the United States and internationally. So God is able. So the question is just whether or not we will choose faith and go. Choose faith. Go.
Amen. Amen. Omar, what word would you offer?
Yeah, I think I learned how to swim when I was 18, and not be out of a dare with my friend. He's like, "Hey, let's sign up for the water polo team." And I was like, "Let's do it." I've always been like that. Let's just do it. Let's just do crazy stuff, right? But I didn't know the cost. I didn't know what it would take. And so, sure enough, the first couple of days were torture. I didn't know how to tread water. And so briefly, the story is like I'm in the pool in the deep end, right? It's not like the public pools where I just used to hang out where my feet could touch the floor. We were in the deep end, and as soon as I would get tired, I would go back to the edge of the pool and then just rest. And then, like, as soon as I was all right, I would push off and I would meet everybody in the middle. Everybody else was in the middle treading water. And here I was trying to tread water and then getting tired going back. So I did this constantly. And then my coach is in the middle with us. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm going to drown if I don't rest, right? If I don't go back and forth." He's like, "You know that you're wasting more energy going back and forth than trying to work the treading in your legs. This is new for you. So you need to work. You need to understand, right?" And then he's like, "Do you think I'm going to let you drown? Like, I'm your coach. Do you think I'm going to let you drown?" And I'm like, "No, coach." So I always use that, and God always brings me back to that. Like, the kingdom is like treading water sometimes, and if we're not in it and we try to do it our way, God has grace for us. He'll watch us go back and forth to the edge, resting and then pushing back. Like, I got it. I know what to do. I know what I need to survive this. And in the end, I think God has always kind of come back. He's like, "Am I gonna let you drown? I know it's hard. I know it's challenging. I know you're going to do something that you're probably not used to." Like, for me, I don't know what trading was. I didn't know how to move my legs like that. And so along the way you'll learn, and I've learned along the way certain things, right? But most importantly, I know my coach is with me. He ain't going to let me drown. I'm in safe hands. Yeah, I'm in the deep end, but I'm with him, right? And so I would just encourage people, like, you're in it with Jesus. He's not going to let us drown. He's not going to turn his back on us. That's his promise. I will never leave you or forsake you, right? I will never, right? And so we have to kind of step into that faith, into those promises, knowing he ain't going to leave us. He's not going to let us go. In fact, he's going to give us green pastures. He's going to give us, in fact, yeah, everything is like, I'm going to give, 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 give. I'm never going to turn my back on you, right? And so I would encourage people to just stay in it, and know that Jesus won't let you down.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much for those words. And I pray that whoever is listening now, 6 months from now, that you can receive that and you can take that in. Well, as we come to the end of our time, I just want to remind you all that we have a gift for anyone that is discerning a sense of calling to their own community, to another community. Maybe you're from an under-resourced community and you're wondering about where God might be leading you to be. Maybe you're not, right? And you're wondering what it might be if God calls me to relocate to another community. I just want to let you know that if you fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, anyone who signs up to have a conversation with somebody at Servant Partners, our gift to you for discernment would be one of these books. So we gladly send you one of these books so that you can read through that, pray through that, and we trust that God will continue to speak to you and encourage you as you're reading some of the stories of these saints, of these brothers and sisters who are working in cities around the world. I just want to thank Kevin, Omar, and Annabel. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for honoring us with your stories of healing and faith and transformation. And I want to thank each of you who joined in the audience. Bless you. May God give you the faith and the courage and the strength you need to say yes and to lead in your community. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Bye-bye.